Yeah, I mean, you talk about marketing, but you have an advantage, I think, because you understand the human psychology element of it, which is just packaging. Marketing is just packaging human psychology.
Yeah, and you would think so. It's really interesting. So what I'm doing a lot of online classes for it, and I reckon, every time I see, one of these experts in marketing, it's because it is a different, it's a very specific skill set, but I see the overlap of all my content, which is all about talking in terms of the customer and talking in terms of other people. So once
Hmm.
I see it, I recognize it. But because I'm used to one-on-one engagements where it's pure trust and pure relationship development, it's more of because I'm more on the customer relationship and sales building side and not on the marketing side. So it's slightly different.
For sure.
Um, so once I see it once, I'm like, oh yeah, I got that. So it's one of those things like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense because it fits my model. But at the same time, when you haven't seen it kind of packaged that way before, you're like, huh. So
Yeah, I can see how that would be a little bit of a hang up. I think, like you said, once you figure it out, like you've got it down, you understand it, then there's also are people going to resonate with this, right? Which is, packaging it in a way that's consumable. So you might understand the human psychology element of it, like what would
right,
drive somebody, fear or joy or, positive benefits or negative ramifications. Now, how do we make it pretty
right.
so people want to engage in it? And that is a challenging thing for sure.
Yeah, and also just coming up because I've never had to do ads before or anything else, and so I have the scaling up I'm going to do is I do have an email list. I do have people that have taken my course in the past, so I have those leads to start with. But then I've done the research. I'm taking another webinar on how to use LinkedIn. As I do get it, most of my speaking business does come through LinkedIn, so now I'm going to try to see if I can maximize that. So, anyways, it's a fun learning process. It gives me something to do every day. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I've enjoyed your work. I haven't been familiar with it for too long, but I read the book Sizing People Up.
Thanks.
And yeah, no, thank you for sending it. I'm glad to be able to have this conversation. I actually am really curious, and I think this will set the tone for the conversation. I mean, obviously, you use the term sizing people up. It
Hmm.
makes sense, but it also has a little bit of a negative connotation, which hopefully captures somebody to want to be engaged in this. I think people could rush to the conclusion that if you're using some of these, I don't know if tactics is the right word or strategies, that you might be doing something that's negative as opposed to, hey, this can actually be a very positive thing.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that was the reason why it was funny. When you work with a publisher and a marketing team there, when they don't read the actual content of the book and they try to come up with a cover design for you, and they think it's a book about manipulation,
Yeah.
you'd be so shocked at some of the things they first sent out to me. And I was like, no. I mean, they had this really dark silhouetted image with black and red, and all the
Hmm.
words on the front were completely different. And I'm like, hey, freaks, have you ever actually read this book? This book, so yes, with sizing people up, and from a counterintelligence behavioral guy, you're thinking this is a book about learning how to manipulate
Hmm.
or understand manipulators or something like that. And as you've read it, as you know, it's anything further from the truth than that. This is about understanding people at a very, very deep level, much deeper than you normally do, with a very clear purpose. Because if you understand people at that deep level, the real purpose is how do you create and maintain a great, healthy relationship?
Hmm.
Because if I can start reasonably predict what you're going to do in all these different situations in life and all these different lanes that we're engaging with, it now gives me the ability to manage my expectations of what I can reasonably expect from you. Because I like to try to take the subjective side of liking someone, which creates some real bias fraught with some potential downsides. And that being, if I like someone, I think I can trust them to do everything,
Right.
which is wrong. I mean, so liking is basically generally based upon our personal subjective observations of commonalities of interests, morals, ethics, beliefs, locality. All these things goes into the liking bias. And unfortunately, we think if we like someone, we can trust someone.
Hmm.
Well, no. I have some really great friends that I like dearly, and I happen to be a pilot. But I couldn't throw them the keys to a plane that I rent and actually trust them to keep me from dying if
Yeah.
they're flying that plane, because that's a different lane that they're in. So that's why I like to try to segregate out the liking bias from the objective observation of what can I reasonably predict you're going to do in each of these lanes. And the most important thing there is just because I can predict you're going to perform and do well in one area doesn't mean you're going to do well in all areas. Because what happens then, if you have this expectation of, well, I just hope they'll do well, well, then that'll set you up for failure as well, because hope can be a very dangerous thing as well. Because hope, we generally as human beings set a bar for hope way up here, and people generally fall in under it.
Yeah, false expectations of the way other people will perform and show up.
Absolutely. When that happens, then what happens to you? You get angry, resentful, frustrated. All the negative emotions pour into your brain directed at the individual because you had not cognitively really thought through what can I reasonably expect they're going to do. It's because now when you do this process, it's all about understanding what they will do at a very deep level. And so they're either going to meet the bar that you manage your expectations for, exceed that bar. And now if they happen to fall short of it, that's okay, because you no longer are angry because you've spent so much time trying to understand them. You know that something must have gone sideways in their lives. So now you're saying, oh, now you have empathy and compassion because, all right, something must have happened. You know, what can I do to be a resource for you? So that's the whole purpose of this entire thing.
I think even having these expectations, not only will it set yourself up for failure, I just don't think it's fair to another individual. Like the
Totally
context
not.
I think about it is, you know, my wife or my children. If I have their expectation up here and they fall short of that, I've set the bar right here. And that may be realistic, but most of the time it's unrealistic. And then they inevitably fall short because people fall short, including us. And then we hold ill will to that individual. And in all reality, it was our fault for maybe setting the bar here and not giving them the training or the information or the communication required to succeed. You know, I see it in, you know, where I see it a lot, actually more recently than maybe in the past, is actors and politicians. We think that because these individuals, like a politician shows up with a suit and is very polished in the way that they deliver a message, that they know everything about everything. Or we see an actor who we really like, and we think because we have an affinity with that individual or a role that they played, that somehow they're qualified to talk about politics or any number of issues that they may know nothing about.
Absolutely. I couldn't say it better. You know, and especially, you know, when you're dealing with family or friends or even close associates at work, when you, what happens is you set that bar so high and they inevitably come in under it. You know, what happens with you is you have those negative emotions and they pick up on you judging them. And when people are feeling that they're being judged in a negative way, that starts spiking their own insecurities. And when insecurities spike up an individual, then they go into defensive mode. They try to justify their actions. And a lot of times it's inappropriate behavior, because what you're basically saying to them is you're attacking our genetic and biological coding to want to be valued by and accepted and affiliated with others. So basically, when you're starting to judge someone, the genetic coding for fear of being rejected by the tribe kicks in.
Yeah,
and so that's when, you know, people start self-aggrandizing, they start name dropping, they start self-promoting, which really makes the situation much worse in most cases. And so it all came down to because you caused it. So that's why I love this process, is how can you not do that so you can maintain those relationships? Because the ground truth of what I've realized in life a number of years ago was that, especially as this hardcore type A, which I thought the way to be successful in life was to make yourself look great, perform great deeds, do great jobs on the things you're assigned. So I thought it was me, accomplish. But that creates a pattern of success, failure, because what you failed to realize is that you can't achieve any of those things without others. Because there's nothing in life you can achieve without relationships. You know, whether it was someone that inspired you, whether they knew it or not, whether someone that was a teacher, mentor, guide, someone that became a resource in some way. You know, everything in life comes down to good, healthy, strong relationships. And the more you have, the deeper they are, the more successful you're going to be in the things you're going to try to accomplish, because you've already made yourself available to others for their success as well. This is a big intertwined pattern. And if you focus on the relationships, the reason why I write my books is so you can have those deep, meaningful ones. Everything in life happens. I always say, if you can have the greatest genetics and biology on the planet, but if you don't have good, healthy relationships, you might as well be a moron on top of a mountain by yourself, because you will go nowhere.
Yeah. No, I do like that you're talking about relationships. And I also want to go back to something you alluded to. What you're talking about here with the strategies that you share in the book and just your work in general is taking responsibility for it. Like I think a lot of people expect others to behave a certain way. And, maybe we should have some of those expectations. Like if you have an employee, for example, there should be some healthy expectations there. But when you do that, you're putting all of the responsibility of performance on them, and you're actually unloading it from yourself. Now, what you're talking about is how can I make observations of other individuals using the strategies that we'll get into here in a little while. And that puts the responsibility where it lies, and also where it has the most power, yourself. You can actually control yourself, not the way others perform.
It's a very easy thing as you get older and more self-aware. And I think, and when when human beings start letting go of their own insecurities and realize, all right, we're all flawed, and so do I. I know what my flaws are, and I have a plan to overcome my flaws. My books are my manuals on how not to be the moron I was born to be, I always say, because I know my weaknesses very, very well. And most human beings, we spend our lifetime creating strategies to overcome our weaknesses, because very, very few of us have to work on our strengths. Our strengths are strengths. If the more self-aware we become of the world around us, the more we understand where we're weak, and we understand, all right, we need to do something about it. And so it's really easy to see someone face a situation and become frustrated. Their first reaction is always very telling of where they are on their path. If the first reaction is to immediately place the blame of everything that's going on or everything that happened to them on others, I was like, all right, you're a little further back on the path. Again, no right, no wrong, no better, no worse. Just, you are not taking accountability for your role in what happened. And so that's what I do first in every situation. When everything goes sideways, if I see emotional hijacking or crazy brain, as I call it, happen with another individual, the first place I look is me. What did I do to be the straw that broke the camel's back with this individual? Because very rarely do people do things to you. You just happen to be in the way of an insecurity that you might have spiked on them. So the first thing I do is assess myself. I assess what I might have done to spur an insecurity in that individual that will, flame up, a negative reaction. And after I do my self-assessment, I think about the words I used, the body language I had, the mannerisms, the topics of conversation. If I can't come up with anything, doesn't mean there's nothing there. But generally, if I can't come up with anything, then I'll look at them and I'll say, all right, now what's going on in their life? So first personal accountability, because people do not care how you make them feel about you. They care about how you make them feel about themselves.
Yeah.
So that's where the focus always is.
Well, that makes sense, because as you were talking about that, the thing I was thinking of is, and I've said this, I know other people feel this way, and we've been in these situations where it genuinely is not us. You might be dealing with a very irrational or emotional individual. It's like, I can't do anything about that. So I do like that you're talking about, okay, look at yourself first, then look to that individual. But the way I'm hearing you say it is not like so you can place blame, but that you can understand so
Absolutely.
you can start working through an issue.
There is no blame to me. I always, another analogy I use is because, there's a few guarantees in life with human behavior, which makes human beings very predictable. One, all human beings will always act in our own best interests in terms of safety, security, and prosperity for ourselves and our loved ones. So as long as I can figure out what you think that is, I now know what you're going to do, because everyone's very different with that. The other thing you can also count on is that we are all imperfect. We all have insecurities, every single one of us. I've done so many investigations with so many human beings throughout the course of my career, and everyone has an insecurity. Everyone has some bit of shame about something, because we're born perfect. For 19 years, the world messes us up pretty good, and we spend the rest of our lives overcoming those things we experienced in those first 19 to 24 years before the prefrontal lobes fully form. So that's the other guarantee.
Yeah, I want to riff on that one a little bit.
Sure.
Do you just to reiterate, maybe talk about this? Do you believe that we're born perfect, and that we're messed up after the fact by parents and other circumstances, or do you believe that we're imperfect or maybe immature, and that needs to be conditioned and learned? Like, I'm really curious on your thought process with that.
So, when you look at evolutionary psychology and organizational psych of early development of children, there's these things that are met before you can evolve into the next stage of life of learning. And, little kids are very non-judgmental of other human beings. And this is seen, if you look at any social psychology videos on YouTube, with universities doing these studies, you look at kids and you look at the way they'll interact with people and not judge is pretty remarkable, because judging is what really starts putting walls up between people. And when people are being judged, they don't feel affiliated with, that's kind of the root, I think, of all the insecurities that human beings is. We fear being judged by anyone. That's why people fear public speaking. That's why they fear writing something and putting it out there, because they fear what someone's going to say. They fear breaking into groups because of the same thing. Cliques at work, cliques at school. It's all about judging, because when we're born not judging. Now, as parents, what happens is we teach our children to judge. And it's for safety, security, and prosperity. As you're getting older,
Sure.
Hey, this is hot. Got to watch out for this person. You have to watch out for this area that we're walking into, or you have to watch out for these types of people at school. These types of people. There's, in other words, your parents are telling you there's bad people out there that can do harm to you, which is true. But we're born without that. And so we have these societal norms, in other words, these learned behaviors during those first formative years of life that teach us to judge others.
Right.
But they teach us to kind of, it's a rough balance, but that's also what starts happening. And then that starts, I think, the whole process where we our insecurities start flare up as well.
Yeah. That makes sense. But there is a healthy line, because there are areas where you shouldn't go. There are people that you should avoid. And without any other data, we have to make some assumptions. We have to fill in some blanks and connect some dots that may not be extremely evident to keep ourselves on the right side of safety and security. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And I think part of it, probably the main time frame where kids are really starting to have this flare up is between ages of 8, 9, 10, basically when they're hitting the middle school years after elementary school, when they start having their own thoughts and opinions, and the parents are trying to not listen to your thoughts and opinions. And that's when our need for dopamine and all the pleasure centers of the brain start firing. And so if you don't get that kind of validation and non-judgmental validation at home, you're going to get it from somewhere. And so that's when you start looking to friends at school. And that's when the cliques started forming. Most bullying happens during the middle school years because of this judgmentalism that, we're just coded for. Because
are we just trying to figure out like where we belong? And because before that, we don't care. After that, we should start figuring it out. Right. So I'm wondering if it's because of that.
Yeah. It's both cultural and genetic that's happening during those years. And so having good, healthy relationships during those years is what actually helps kids transition healthy into the next phase of evolution for themselves in their life.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know even now at 39 years old, like I feel like over the past 5 years, I've really started to let a lot of the way other people feel about me kind of go by the wayside. And again, I don't know if that's a level of maturity. I don't know if that's doing a lot of work on myself to be confident in who I am. It's probably a mix of both. But
I would say
it's pretty nice to be in that position.
Yeah, I think, when you were out there a lot, you're a public figure, you do podcasts, you do a lot of things with the public, which opens you up for being validated and also being judged.
No doubt.
And so what you start doing is, because I had the same thing, I am highly insecure. When you start publishing books and, you're on Amazon every day, wait for the next review to come in, and you feel like $1 million with a 5-star, and all of a sudden you feel like you all want to crawl into a rock when you see your first 1-star,
right?
And you just, that's when you start realizing that, anytime you take an opinion, half the world's going to line up with you and half the world's going to line up against you. It's just the way it is. You're not going to please everyone, and you shouldn't try, because think about the greatest people in the history of the world, whether it was Gandhi, Martin Luther King, JFK, George Washington, Jesus. All these people they were great human beings that did great things for a lot, but a lot of people hated them as well.
Yeah.
And so think about that. So I just kind of like, it's okay. We're all okay.
I always try to get back to neutral in my thought of myself, right? So you think about it like this. If you look at a scale and you have somebody leave you a 5-star review or tell you how wonderful you are, it's like your job to like bring you back into reality. Like, hey, I appreciate that, but in my mind, I'm like, I'm not as good as that guy's making me out to be. Oh, that way, when I get the 1-star review or the criticism or the negative comments, I'm like, yeah, you know what, bring it back. I'm actually better than this guy's making me sound, and trying to stay on that that neutral line, the perception I have of myself has served me well, because I take everything, praise and criticism, with a grain of salt. And if I only take criticism as being true, I think it's much easier for me to also take criticism as holding more weight than maybe it ought to.
And I think it helps you really just then to also focus on not external, but also just focus on the content you're trying to get out. Because when you're focusing on the content, of the things you've learned, the things that have helped you become, a better contributor to society and a greater resource for others' success, that's when you just kind of let go of negatives and positives. You just do what you are compassionate about.
Right.
And, my good friend Joe Navarro is my mentor and guide, who wrote the book, What Everybody Is Saying. Was on my behavioral team, an international expert for nonverbal behavior. And he told me something years and years ago. I always repeat when people ask, why do you do this? And how do you let go of the negatives, people say? So, because what he's always told me is that if you have at least one bit of information another human being could benefit from, shame on you for not getting it to them.
Great point.
So as a contributing member of society, of the human race, I think everyone has something they can share that another human being could benefit from, even if it's just one. So that's what I focus on.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to go back to the term manipulation. You had talked about that earlier, and I think most people hear that, and again, negative connotation.
Absolutely.
I don't know though. If you look at what that means, or at least the way I've understood it and determined it, it's like I'm always manipulating, from the way that we're having this conversation and the questions I'm asking, to trying to get my kids to do chores, to trying to influence somebody who might read a book or listen to a podcast to behave or act in a certain way. I mean, there's upsides to the idea. Maybe we're just using different words, but the idea of manipulation. So like, what's positive, what's negative? Where do you fall on that scale? How do you maybe choose to define the positive attributes of influence, maybe even compared to negatively manipulating somebody?
So I think there's a real easy test to see if you're actually manipulating, and what you just said and how you said it just says you're not manipulating. Trying to get someone to do something is not necessarily manipulation. And here's the thing that makes it manipulation. If you use subterfuge or deception or lack of transparency, that's manipulation. In other words, so my definition of manipulation is I love to give labels and meanings of things, because when I give labels and meanings, I have what I call my Toyota Tundra effect. Yes, Toyota Tundra. Yeah. So basically, when I bought my truck, I swear, as soon as I did, 300 people in my town bought the same truck.
Of course. Right.
I call it the new car effect, because it has labels and meanings, so you now recognize it. So you can do the same thing with behaviors. So as soon as that's why I write these books, and that's why I teach the way I teach. So I give labels and meanings to behaviors so we can recognize them. The negative ones we know what to steer clear from, and the positive ones we know what to do more of. And so that's why I give labels and meanings. So manipulation, the label and meaning for me, is an attempt of control of actions, thoughts, and time, or any other aspect, with the use of subterfuge or deception or lack of transparency. And so,
even to produce a positive outcome. Like, let me give an example of that.
Yeah.
So as an employer, okay, an employer is probably not going to disclose every bit of information to an employee to have that employee perform or do something or lead up a project or organize a team. He's not going to share all of that information, but there's reasons that he wouldn't. And a lot of the times an employee may not see the entire picture, but he's asked to follow on faith and just with the information he has.
Sure. And that's a great example. So here's two things that are mitigators in situations like that, especially if you have a great inspirational leader. One is that if a majority of the time leading up to situations like that there is transparency and communication going on, then you have trust. And then when those moments when you actually do have to poke someone in the eye, or you have to get someone to do something, you have a bank of trust already built up that they know, hey, this is most likely okay. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, and I've had to do this, I'm the counterintelligence spy recruiter that tell you, I never lied to you. I was very straight up and honest and transparent. Now, same thing in my situation as with the boss, is that if someone questions you about why they have to do something, or they're looking for you to pull the curtain back behind, see what's going on behind the scenes, and it's inappropriate according to policy or morale or anything else, and if the boss says, hey, I'd love to share this with you and I can't because of X, Y, and Z, Well, that's also transparent.
That's true. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, good point.
Because I've had before, where I'd walk up to someone on vacation, a spy of some sort, and see if they wanted to grab a cup of coffee or have a conversation about their priorities and let them know what I have as resources, something along those lines, basically a cold call in the middle of nowhere. And they'd look at me and say, how did you know I was here? Meanwhile, I had lots of tools and techniques to find out how they're there, but I'm not at liberty to disclose them. And I just say, we have lots of ways that we find out where people are, because, when we think you're a potential threat to national security, we tend to really pay attention to you.
Sure.
I'd love to share it with you, but I'm not at liberty to do so for your protection and the protection of our tools and techniques. So if you still want to have that cup of coffee, great. If not, I totally understand. That's transparency.
That's interesting. Can you tell, I mean, just to go to that example, can you, even if you didn't have some of these tactics and information and access to technology and that sort of thing, are there things that you can look for and say, oh, there's something about this individual that might represent some sort of intelligence agency or, some additional training that really stands out when you see an individual like that?
Yeah. Probably not at face glance, at first glance. And believe it or not, using technology is not all that common, because it's such a, our country is so fantastic with our Constitution. It is so rock solid, regardless of, I know we've had, horrendous things in the news, at the top of the executives inside the FBI in the last bunch of years that, abuse certain things. But in general, for the layman on the street, which I was and also interacted with when I ran our behavioral team, it is such a massive, laborious process, especially if the U.S. person, not even a U.S. citizen, but a U.S. person, in other words, someone here that is in a transition to get a green card or any other category that is they're a U.S. person, the level of confidence you needed to demonstrate to a court and all the checks along the way, it took so long
really
to actually use technology on your side. So it was so much easier to develop the skills and tools I talk about in my books about human beings, because human beings have much better information than any bit of technology, because technology very rarely gives you context, and context is so critically important. You only really get context from human beings. And so,
well, and it's a lot more translatable as well, right? If you have technology, great, you can pick out this one individual that you have an interest in. But if you have the information, like you're talking about, the behavioral information, the ability to read people and predict their behavior accurately, then that translates to anybody you might need to recognize or acknowledge, whether that's a potential active shooter, or some sort of threat like that, or looking for a partner and being able to determine, is this a woman, for example, that I want to commit my life to? Like, it's very translatable if you have that set of skills versus the technology.
And really, and so go back to your original question. Can you tell someone who, because most, I'd say 95 to 98 or even 99% of, foreign intelligence collectors in our country are diplomats under diplomatic cover. Is how do you tell that if someone's actually an intelligence officer as well as, under, trying to pretend to be a regular diplomat? Well, it's easy. Is their daily activity consistent with what their job is?
Right. Sure.
And so if you see someone, I'd say, so our guys, say, they get into work at 9 o'clock in the morning, and at 9 o'clock in the morning, they should be going over to the embassy or the United Nations, if that's where all the other, employees worked. But all of a sudden, like 3 days a week, they're not going over there, and they're going on drives, for 3 or 4 hours, and they're taking these weird routes every place. And it makes no sense consistent with them being an attaché in a certain area. And then afterwards, they huddle down inside, their establishment writing, when everyone else is home. And so you can assume they're writing reports and cables that then go back. Now, that's someone who's probably doesn't have our best interest in their heart.
Yeah. Well, and I've heard this from a lot of those people who are good or have some training in situational awareness, is they talk about establishing the baseline first.
Yes.
And I think that's what a lot of people miss, is like, if you go to a concert, for example, the people at a concert, generally the baseline is going to be different than if you're at a symphony or an orchestra, right? Versus a hard rock concert. You need to establish the baseline first to see, okay, this is normal behavior for the circumstances, or this is out of the ordinary, and I need to be more aware of that.
And human beings pick up on it really, really well all the time. And from the creepy car salesman, you're picking up on incongruence between actions and words. That's an easy one. When we walk into work in the morning, when we used to walk into work in the morning, now we'll see it via Zoom. You can always tell who's having a bad day without anyone saying anything because their nonverbals are deviating from their baseline. The only difference between someone that does it for a profession and anyone else is that I pay attention to it because I have to pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just taking a muscle skill that everyone has and just building that muscle memory by doing it a lot. But everyone can do it, and everyone does do it every day without even realizing it.
So this sounds a little bit at odds with what I saw in, I think it was the first part of your book where you talked about being able to trust your gut, I think is the term you used,
Yep.
and how you used to feel fairly confident in that, and now you just don't. So how do you reconcile the idea that we can pick up on the used car salesman or the guy that's just a little shady or off, and hey, don't trust your gut?
So I have two sides of this that I kind of bifurcate them. And the first one we talked about already is liking. Liking is part of that gut, because as human beings, we kind of glump everything together.
Mm-hmm.
And I like kind of separating things out so you can know what you can rely upon better than others. And so we tend to glump, our intuition and our liking at the same thing because they think that's a gut feeling. And here's how I define it. So liking I've already defined as overlapping of commonalities of morals, ethics, background, interests, all the things that make me enjoy being around someone.
Which can be manipulated, I imagine. Like if I'm trying to get you to like me, I can figure out what you're into and create and fabricate some form of likability. Maybe not all of it, but some of it, I would think.
Yeah, for short spurts of time is the best thing I'm going to say with that.
Okay.
So my experience with that is that, so I did a lot of undercover work for a number of years when I was in New York. And anytime you're trying to be someone or something you're not, it's mentally exhausting, and you'll eventually tire of it and you'll start slipping and go back to who you are. I mean, think about, here's a great way to think about it that we've all witnessed. Think about political campaigns, whether they're local or whether they're, for the presidency. You see people on a campaign trail when they're during the primary season, and you see them on a stage, every now and then. And man, they are game on great.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden they get into their elected position. You start seeing them every single day or every couple days. And you start seeing it's not quite the same guy that I elected because they were game on they could put a show on for an hour or two at a time. But when they're under scrutiny and under the camera for 24 hours a day or something, you're going to see the true them come out because it's exhausting trying to be someone you're not.
Right. Okay.
So when I was doing undercover work, matter of fact, when I went through the undercover certification school, it's about 10 days to 2 weeks. It was the most emotionally exhausting thing I've ever done in my life. And so at the end of it, I slept for like 3 days.
Really?
Because your brain is thinking all the time.
Yeah.
Who am I? 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 And as people get older, they start slipping. And, so the true you starts really coming out because basically the true you comes out under stress, whether stress is.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so whether stress is exhaustion or whether stress is from anger, all the negative emotions, that's when, all the shields you have up kind of shed away and your core comes out. And so,
yeah, that makes sense. I guess this is why I think about acting. I know we were talking about it earlier, but, you see these great actors and they get so into their role, so much so that I think it becomes hard for them to distinguish between themselves and their character. I imagine they have to do that. Otherwise, it would just be so, like you said, so exhausting to play like different parts to different people in different circumstances.
It is. And the greatest thing about great method actors that are the best out there, it's just the same thing as undercover. I mean, I did acting classes because it's the same exact thing. It's you imbue a new person into you. And that's why these great actors are truly gifted because they built up all this muscle memory about how to do that, becoming someone completely different and completely new for those periods of time. That's why it's such hard. It's funny, people that any profession that if you're a master at and you're an expert at, it's a lot of hard work and it's not just easy.
Sure.
And some of the greatest method actors in the world, that is excruciating years and years of building muscle memory up. So it doesn't become so exhausting that you can only do it for a couple minutes at a time, but they can do it days at a time when they need to.
Right. I interrupted you earlier. You were talking about trusting your gut and how do you reconcile that with with what you believe now, which say I don't necessarily trust your gut.
Right. So the liking, I don't trust, because liking and disliking something creates a bias in us that, it's very, very difficult to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
And if we like someone or something, we tend to think everything out of their mouth is completely fine. And if we don't like them, it's exactly the same thing. The best analogy of this right now is politics.
Of course.
It is, without a doubt, I'll put both of them out there. Hillary Clinton and President Trump are clearly the most divisive people that have ever run for president. It's not because of their policies, believe it or not. It's actually because they were probably the most well-known presidential candidates we've ever had.
Great point. Yeah, good point.
Hillary because of Bill, because she's been in public service for so long, and Trump because he's been on TV forever. I mean,
Right.
when I was growing up in New York, I heard about Trump, from when I was in high school. So when you have someone that well known for that long, people have already made a choice whether they like them or dislike them. And so if you like Hillary, there's nothing she can do that you will say was wrong.
Right.
Same thing with Trump. If the Trump supporters like Trump, there's absolutely nothing he can do they're going to bash. And we're seeing it right now. Mm-hmm. And the converse of that, if you disliked either of them, there's nothing they could do right. I remember I posed this theory to my daughter, and she does not like the president. And she says, "Dad, I don't believe that. I don't think that's accurate."
How old is she?
She's 22.
Okay.
About to graduate a nurse.
Okay.
Another month. And she says, "I don't think that's true. I don't think I have that bias." I said, "Okay." I said, "Help me understand this." I said, "You don't like President Trump?" She goes, "No." I said, "Is there anything he could do you'd agree with?" And she goes, "Oh, no, never." I said, there you go.
Exactly. Well, and we've all seen these videos where a reporter or some sort of a pollster or somebody will go to somebody and say, "Hey, tell me what you think about, for example, Hillary Clinton's policy," and then they'll list out like 3 to 5 policies, and they'll say, yeah. "Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that." This is a self-proclaimed Democrat, for example. "I love that. I love." Well, would it surprise you to find out that those were actually Donald Trump's policies? Backpedal. And It happens on both sides of the aisle, but that just proves the point.
Absolutely. So liking is a very dangerous thing I do, that people do, that I try to take out of the equation. And the other, so that's part of our intuition. I mean, part of our thing that, the gut feeling. Now, the other part is intuition. And so here's how I define intuition. And this actually can be a little bit more accurate for people, as long as you don't clump liking into intuition. So intuition for me is the congruence that you see between someone's nonverbal behavior and their verbal statements. So the example is, if someone is saying the right things, like I have, I think it's a fifth sign. No, fifth sign is language. So if someone's using the right language with me, in other words, making that conversation about me by seeking my thoughts and opinions, talking in terms of my priorities, validating me without judging me, and or empowering me with choices. When they're doing, whether you're doing it to them or they're doing it to you, you're making that entire conversation about them. It's fantastic. Now, if their nonverbals are congruent with that, in other words, good high comfort nonverbals where I got a nice head tilt, exposed my carotid artery, smiling, full facial smile, some eyebrow elevation, ventral displays with palms up, basically the body is opening up and out. It's high comfort with a conversation about you. That's great congruence. So my intuition in that point will be, this person is a good person. They're trustworthy. That's my intuition. And on the converse side, if they're saying all those same things, in other words, talking in terms of my priority, like a great used car salesman that is actually shady, that gives you the creeps. They're talking in terms of your priorities. They're validating you. They're empowering you with choices. And they're talking in terms of your priorities. But if they're using very aggressive nonverbal behavior or very tense nonverbal behavior, like eyebrow compression, leering at you, leaning in at you, palms down, trying to dominate the conversation, they're using a tempo that's out of sync with your tempo, they're assertive, all these things that are saying they're on the attack, yet their conversation is about you, that's very incongruent with the words. That's what gives people the creeps. So that's part of the gut I think people are actually decent-ish at. Then that should give you the pause to say, all right, something's a little off. Now let's look at these 6 signs.
Yeah, we're going to get into that, but I do like the idea of congruency, because I've always looked at, you were talking about body language, the nonverbal form of communication. And I've had people, because my background is sales, so I've had trainers come in and they're like, if you, like you said, your palms are out and you match the speed of what they're saying and you're doing all these things, and like, deep down inside, I'm like, this is bullshit. Like maybe that guy's just standing with his arms crossed, for example, because he's comfortable with his arms crossed.
High comfort move. Yep.
Right? Or he's cold and you're
Yep.
reading it as being closed off. It's like, it could have nothing to do with that. But I think what you're saying here is
Clusters.
right. We're not using that body language alone. We're using it as a metric.
Yep.
In conjunction with everything else that we'll get into.
Just one more data point. That's all it is.
Right.
Yeah. I never look at one solo thing and make that determining thing. And here's the other thing too. That's why, nonverbals, and you know this because obviously you've listened to a lot of people and did a lot of training with it. Nonverbals alone are horrible indicators of deception. And you can't rely on those alone because, nonverbals for deception are stress nonverbals, and stress nonverbals are also caused by bad thoughts, negative thoughts, a bad experience. It's all the same thing, so they all look the same in everyone. So you need really good statement analysis as well as nonverbals, and it's very difficult. Best people in the world are only 50% accurate at best
with body language alone.
With body language alone for detecting deception.
Right.
So I don't even bother. It's just silly.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so easy to misread. So I mean, and the other thing we do is we come with our own assumptions about the way that we would perform or the way we'd show up. So we think that, well, that person's saying something I would say, so they must be feeling the exact same thing that I would be feeling in that situation. And it could be completely different. We have our own biases.
Yep. And I think the other test, because you're right, if someone could actually be saying all the right words and they're trained to non-verbally do all the right things, and so people then say, well, so what if someone's a fantastic manipulator? How do you recognize that? And I go back to my first, thing about transparency. Manipulators have a hard time with transparency. And so if I'm seeking transparency, in other words, I'm not quite understanding what you're saying because you're talking a little too fast, you're trying to overcomplicate things, or I always make the excuse that, hey, I got a really slow brain. I don't have the 50-pound brain like you. Help me understand. What exactly are you saying?
Right.
And if they can't help you understand, that's when I take notice and I back off, because that's someone who's not looking for an open, honest communication and dialogue, most likely not in my best interest. So I'm out.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think most people are probably afraid to some degree of that level of confrontation, though. I remember.
Oh, and it's so not confrontational because look what I did.
Well, I think they're perceiving it that way, though.
Absolutely, but you own it. In other words, I never pass a judgment on you. I'll never say, "Hey, dude, you're just trying to manipulate me." No.
Right.
No.
You're just trying to figure it out.
Right. I'm seeking transparency because I don't understand, and if you can't make me understand, that's my fault. I apologize. Maybe you come back another time. If you think you can dumb it down even more for me, fantastic. But until that day, hey, see you later.
Yeah, good point. I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was on a sales call with somebody that wanted to offer us some solutions to some things that we're dealing with. And he was using this really cryptic language. He's like, yeah, I'll see what we can do, and I'll talk with this individual, and I'm sure we can work something out. He's just being really cryptic about it. And I just said, hold on. And I flat out said, I said, you're being really cryptic in your language. I don't understand what you're saying. So can you help me specifically understand what it is you're talking about? You're saying you're going to talk to this individual. What are you going to ask that individual? What solution are you going to provide? I don't understand.
Right.
And he actually did have a very good response to that. But the other thing that it did, which was nice, is that it pinned him down to something. So now there's an expectation that he has to meet because he said it. I don't think he was being deceitful necessarily. I think he just didn't want to be pinned down to being held to what he had said.
Sure.
So bringing that out, drawing that out, helped me come to that conclusion.
Yeah. And also, because a lot of times too, I've noticed, especially you're dealing with someone who's, I won't say younger because I've seen younger people that are fantastic at this. Someone less experienced or a little insecure about themselves and their abilities will rely upon maybe a script that a company has given them. And so even though they're very genuine, they're very sincere, they're actually trying to make it all about you, but they're following a script, which sounds like that might've been something like that. But when you pin them down on hey, why don't you throw the script aside and really tell me what the hell's going on? Yeah. And they do. All right, that's fine. No problem.
I'm glad that you talked about younger, because I was looking at my 4-year-old and thinking about him. I'm like, man, this kid at 4 years old, he's a master manipulator. That stuff doesn't need to be trained. They're just born with it. Well, they're born with it because they need to stay alive. But we also train them as parents. If I scream loud enough for long enough, I'll give them what they want. So that's what they interpret.
Well, he's always effective.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Exactly.
even my son, he's very, him and I, we've strategized, relationships forever. He's at the Naval Academy right now. Well, actually home right now, studying at the Naval Academy, like everyone. But
Yeah.
he's fantastic at strategizing, how to have a good, healthy relationship, how to have a good conversation, how to send a great email. Because he's 20, and it took me till probably about 5 or 10 years ago till I started really saying, I think I've been doing things really off my entire life.
That's an interesting term, strategize relationships. Is there a point at which it becomes counterproductive and robotic to the point where it's like, hey, this is not even real human interaction at this point anymore?
I get asked that a lot of times too. There's a great thing that I think with some people it can start out robotic. I've had people say to me before, I've actually had FBI agents in some of my classes say, Robin, how do I do this? I just really don't care about people. And I said, well, first of all, you're in the wrong line of work.
Right.
but here's an interesting byproduct. I always did care about people, but I'm genetically very self-centered. I'm on the Myers-Briggs, ENTJ, expert intuitive thinking, judger. I'm all about conquering a dominant personality. I'm just hardwired for not really thinking of myself first. And so it wasn't, I enjoy people. I love people. And it always hurt me deeply when I accidentally wronged someone because I had that behavior. So this process actually is extremely empathetic. It gives you the empathy that you might not have had intuitively, because when you start seeking the thoughts and opinions of others, learning about their priorities so you can start talking in terms of their priorities. The other thing I do is I'm always looking for what people are great at and strong at and what their strengths are, because if you want to have a conversation, you need to focus on that. So when you start doing those things and you start getting outside yourself and you start realizing, dang, there's a lot of people around me. Matter of fact, everyone around me has these mad skills I had no idea about, and they're so wonderful in these areas. It starts bringing up out of you a thing called, which is the best thing I think you can have as a human being to make these great connections, curiosity. If you're curious about people and curious about how they became the human beings they are, and you combine that without judging them, that is the way you're going to move forward with everything. If you become curious, being a curious human being, I think is probably one of the healthiest things you can do if you can couple it without judging. And you put those two things together and you're going to see the world completely start opening up and lightening up for you.
Yeah, that's a great word and a great message. I know there's a lot of people who reach out to me, for example, asking for podcasting help. How do you interview? How do you have conversations? They'll say things like, "Oh, you're a natural, or you're great at this." I'm like, no, I've just done over 1,000 interviews now at this point. Like, that's why I'm good at it.
Absolutely. Lots of muscle memory.
It is. And what's interesting is so I would take, like, your book, for example. I would take your book and I would go through it with a highlighter, which I still do because that's important. I want to make sure I'm researched on this stuff. And then I would write down, like, verbatim the questions that I wanted to ask the people that I was having on the show. And I don't do that anymore because I think that was a disservice to them. It wouldn't allow me to explore avenues and paths that just came up naturally in the conversation. And it was pretty painstaking. And now it's taking bullet points. And the only thing that bridged that gap to be able to do that was I just have to be genuinely curious. If I'm curious about you or anybody else I have on the podcast, it's going to be a great conversation, inevitably.
Yeah, and here's the shift you made, which is it's a great point. What a great thing to highlight. So highlighting things where you're getting, topics, potential topics to explore and go down, depending if I'm chatty or not, is fantastic. But when you start writing down questions that you want to ask, what starts happening is you start following a script, and the script is about what you want to do and not about what I want to say. And so when you let go of a script and you pay attention to the words that the other person's saying, but you have the themes that you want to make sure you cover for the audience, that's where it brings on that beautiful natural flow, because you made the conversation about me, but at the same time, the topics that are going to be good for your audience, and you keep that in mind so you can just guide the words coming out of my mouth. So in other words, as I'm sharing the words out of my mouth, what I'm doing is I'm sharing my priorities with you. And what you're able to do now, you can actually go to the buffet of information of priorities I'm giving, and you can hand pick the different priorities that I was willing to talk about and bring up, and theme it with the areas that your audience is looking for. And that's what makes a great interviewer, makes a great conversationalist, because, again, the entire conversation, you're the bridge of the gap between the great conversation with me and serving your audience.
I even think about this in the context of women, because a lot of the men who listen, they're attracted to women. Obviously, they want to have dates. They want to do these things and engage with women, which is wonderful. But they struggle. And I found that the reason that a lot of these guys struggle is because they're so worried about themselves. It has nothing to do with the woman. Because if you were just curious about her, you'd be a great conversationalist. You'd actually be somebody she really enjoyed talking with. But you're so worried about how she's looking at you, how she's perceiving you. Are you cool? Are you attractive? Are you a potential mate? Like, you're so worried in your own head that you can't just have a great conversation, which is what would actually attract her to begin with.
And let's go back then to what I had said earlier on, in the program. Remember, especially in the dating world, it's not how you make them feel about you. It's how you make them feel about themselves. And how do you make them feel great about themselves? You gotta get that dopamine going in the brain and the serotonin, oxytocin, make the pleasure centers fire when you're talking to them. So these 4 things, once again: seek their thoughts and opinions. Find out what their priorities are. In other words, the challenges that they have in their life, and talk in terms of those things. Everything that they're saying and doing, validate it. In other words, have that curiosity to seek to understand everything that they're saying. Doesn't mean you necessarily agree, but you want to validate it. So you seek to understand it. And now, if appropriate, you empower them with choices. Like, even if you had a great time, I really hope you did. And if you'd like to get together again and comfortable with it, why don't you give me a call? Or would you like me to call you? Again, more choices, empower them with choice. And there's a great conversation. There's a great date.
You talk about priorities. I think it's pretty easy to figure out what somebody's tangible priorities are. Like, I want to live here. I want to go on this vacation. I want to drive this car. I want to do this work. How do you identify the non-tangibles and what is motivating people? Things that maybe they can't even articulate themselves.
I love this question. This is one of my favorite ones. And few people, I don't think anyone's ever asked it, because you're leading in what I call means goals and ends goals.
Okay.
Like, people think it's the means, it's an expression, it's the means to the end.
Right. Sure.
And what you just named were all the means goals people have, whether it's a vacation, a car, a promotion, a transfer, a new house. All these things are means to the end. And the end goal goes back to what we were all genetically coded for. We're seeking, to act in our own best interest in terms of safety, security, and prosperity. In other words, all those things you just mentioned are what they define as things they need in their lives for safety, security, and prosperity.
Okay.
Right. And so here's, if you want to understand what someone, because again, people don't know a lot of reasons why they do the things they do. They're just reacting to the stimulus around them or keeping up with the Joneses or something like that. But if you hear someone talking about one of their means goals they're looking for, whether it's a promotion, a transfer, training opportunity, new car, all these things, ask them, hey, what are you hoping to get from that? If you get that new car, what's the emotion? What thing are you trying to get out of that? Is it a sense of, feeling superior to someone? Is it you're trying
Freedom,
to
yeah.
Is it trying to bring greater comfort and security and safety when you drive your family around? Why? You should just always ask that. Again, the couple of questions I love, from my first book, It's Not All About Me, is like, ask how, when, and challenges questions. How does it you decided you wanted to do that? When did you decide you wanted that kind of car? What kind of challenges do you think you're going to have moving from what you have to what you want? Those are great open-ended questions. You're going to get a whole lot of deep thought on those.
I think you will, as long as you don't take it too far. And I've been guilty of this, and I've seen other people be guilty of this. I no longer feel like we're having a conversation about these things. I feel like I'm being grilled or interrogated. And so how do you find that balance to not push and take it too far?
Watch the nonverbals. So if you're starting to take it too far, in other words, if your tempo and intensity and the depth of the questions you're asking are inappropriate or too fast for that individual, you're going to immediately pick up on some stress nonverbals. You're going to get a little, maybe withdrawal.
Yeah, lean
like
back,
a little pullback
sure.
for you, a little eyebrow compression, maybe lip compression, a little frowny face, anything that's kind of showing it that they're from the baseline that you established of the normal conversation you're having where you had good comfort nonverbals. If all of a sudden you're getting some flashes of discomfort, back off. It means that you're pushing it not according to their tempo, you're pushing according to your tempo. Because some people disclose everything all at once. Some people, it's going to take you years,
Right.
because it's not about you and your tempo. It's about them and their tempo. You got to be very cognizant of it. So it's another great point to bring up, and because there are I call them relationship accelerators that you can utilize. And we're just kind of really talking about them there, especially, when we're dealing with this online world right now. I know people are very insecure, especially in sales and business and client relations. They're trying to maximize, how we need to get people on board now, but I'm dealing with the virtual world or all these things. Relationship intensifiers. I actually mentioned them in the book too, is one, proximity. Proximity right now is challenging for us because the best proximity you can have is one-on-one in person.
Right.
But the second best thing right now, Zoom, like we're doing now, Skype, all these things where you can at least see each other from the chest up. So these are great indicators that we can still make a good connection. Backing off from that will be telephone calls, or just voice, or via voice Skype or something. Then from there, it's emails. From there, it's texting. So that's, from the best to the worst. Those are accelerators. The next accelerators are going to be time. Are you spending 30 seconds in a text or in a quick conversation, or you spend an hour talking to someone? Because the amount of time you spend with someone is also an accelerator. The third accelerator is intensity, and that's one of the things that we were just talking about. Are you talking about asking them those how, when, and challenges type questions, or they're going to dive really deep on the meaning of life by what they're doing, or are you just talking about the weather? Mm-hmm. So those are great potential intensifiers to accelerate the level of trust and relationship, but you got to be very, very careful because the tempo is up to them. You don't want to push beyond what they're willing to accept.
Do you find, let me back up, let me say it this way. Do you disclose and tell people what you've done in the past for a living?
Absolutely, because that's transparency.
I'm just wondering if even that alone, I mean, I'm sure you do it in an appropriate way, but even that alone, I imagine it probably intimidates a lot of people. Like they feel like, oh, he's reading me. Oh, he's trying to determine and decipher what it is I'm doing and what I'm thinking, and that throws people off.
So my general response to people is I have given my presentations, my keynotes, my training to all my bosses. When I was still working with the FBI, to friends, family, everyone to see me do what I do. Mm-hmm. And every now and then I have a boss that say, "Hey, Robin, you doing it to me now?" I said, "What?
That's what I'm saying."
Yeah. What? Making it all about you? You're damn right I am. If you want me to stop, I'll stop that too. Because I use the self-deprecating humor, which is very true. I said, I am a natural born self-centered ass. I will do the best I can not to be that for you.
Yeah, I guess your purposes are aligned in many ways in that case.
Yeah, and again, when I throw in the transparency and the lack of insecurities by not trying to hide who I am and my background and what I'm doing, I said, thank God I actually, wound up doing the things I wound up doing, because I sucked really bad. I wanted to be this great, when I was in high school, I wanted to become this great leader. Matter of fact, people generally will sometimes ask me, so how did you get to be the chief of the behavioral analysis program in the FBI?
Right.
That sounds so cool. It must have been a lifelong dream. I go, nope, no, it wasn't. I said, when I was in high school, I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. I wanted to become an aerospace engineer. I wanted to become a Navy pilot, test pilot, and astronaut. And they said, well, what happened? I said, I absolutely failed at everything. I did get in the Naval Academy. It took me an extra year, and almost took me an extra year to get out, because I failed out of aerospace engineering, major in political science, went Marine Corps instead of Navy Air, because my eyes went bad my sophomore year at the Naval Academy. So everything went completely sideways. And I wound up doing what I wound up doing because that's the life that was presented you, and you just want to do better what you're presented. But the end goal that I had when I was very young, I did want to become a great leader. And I was trying to force the means about how to get there. I thought to become a great leader, I had to do what I just articulated. No, what I really needed to do to become a better leader was actually something very simple. How to learn how to make it about everyone else but myself, and learn how to become a resource for the success and prosperity of those around me without expectation or reciprocity. Great inspirational leaders do three things. They accomplish the mission, they take care of their people and their safety, so they go home every day, and they're a resource for their success and prosperity. And that resource for the success and prosperity is key and paramount. I learned it when I was in the Marine Corps by mistake, because there's a point when I was at Parris Island training recruits, and I had all these drill instructors working for me, that I realized that, wow, these Marines are better Marines than I'm ever going to be. And my job is to make sure they don't do something stupid to hurt their careers. And I literally understood my role was morale officer. If I kept them mentally healthy and kept them from being stressed, they're not going to do something stupid to ruin their careers. So I learned my first behaviorism was reading nonverbals of stress and mitigating it before it hurt them. And I threw myself on a couple, virtual grenades, to save a couple of my Marines every now and then. And I only realized years later that they recognize it too, because I live actually just south of Quantico, Virginia, and they'll call it the Crossroads in Marine Corps, because literally you bump into people all the time you knew from years ago.
Right? Yeah, I bet.
So I was trained. So when my son was really small here, I was coach of his baseball team, his t-ball team. And I'm out in the outfield with the kids coming in, and I hear from the sideline, Captain Dreeke. It was one of my drill instructors that had worked for me like 20 years ago. Yeah, his son was on my baseball team, and he still tells a story about how he saved his career one time. And I was like, oh, thank God that. And he didn't want to hit me. So that was good.
I bet that's pretty rewarding and fulfilling at that point.
It was, because, my time prior to there, I had made some blunders, some great humbling moments about how I was interacting with my peers. And, they made sure I knew that, hey, I kind of sucked. And the fact that by the time I had figured out, all right, subjectively, it's an art form. Leadership's an art form. And I had to figure out how to make it a paint by number so I could actually do it.
Well, I like that you're talking about, your ends is to be a great leader. You could do that as an astronaut. You could do that in the FBI. You can do that wherever you happen to be.
It's not about title and position. It's about how you treat people.
Yeah.
That's it entirely. I when I retired from the Bureau, because sequestration had, decimated my team. So I went back to the street. I was a street agent again in the last couple of years of my career. I was doing, I gave up title and position. I was curious whether I'd still have the ability to do a lot of speaking engagements, a lot of training, because that was part of what I did. And I loved it. Found out I wound up doing it even more, because people did not want me because of the title and position. They wanted me because of how I made them feel about themselves. That was really pretty much it.
Yeah. So is your son following in your footsteps? Is he going down that path?
He's going down the path that I wanted to go down.
That's what I'm asking. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
So far, yeah, he's a mechanical engineer and kicking it. He's doing really well. He wants to be a Navy pilot. He's already a pilot. He got his private pilot's license in high school, and he's still flying at the academy. So he wants to go to the Navy pilot route too.
That's excellent. Yeah, I was planning on going to the Naval Academy in high school my junior year, and honestly, I don't know why I stopped going down and pursuing that path, but that was definitely something I was interested in, and I was getting my paperwork and application together, and senator recommendations and all of that stuff. So it's cool to see that.
Good deal. Yeah, it's not an easy process.
Maybe that's why I stopped. It was like, screw this. I don't want this that bad.
Well, good for you.
Yeah. Well, let's talk just briefly, because I can't believe how quickly this time went.
I know. I was looking at the class. Wow, I've been yammering at you.
No, it's been good. This has all been valuable information, but we haven't really got into the 6 signs of prediction, which is kind of what I really wanted to talk about. So you talked a little bit about language, but maybe we could just pull a couple of these out of here, and maybe there's a few that you feel like, okay, that's one worth really talking about based on our conversation.
Sure. I'll hit language again briefly, because I get asked a lot of times, hey, what's something I can do to size someone up or literally kind of start being able to predict them really rapidly? Mm-hmm. Language is probably the easiest one. Again, what I'm looking for. And so here's what's also important with this. These are signs I'm looking for in others, but also signs and things I should be doing for others at the same time.
Sure.
So language is one of them. So I'm looking for someone seeking my thoughts and opinions, talking in terms of what's important to me, or at least trying to discover what's important to me and my priorities, not judging anything I'm saying. They're validating me and being curious about me, and they're giving me choices. So those are the things I can look at really rapidly. And if I have someone doing that with nonverbal congruence of high comfort in the first couple minutes, we're starting off on a good foot.
Okay.
I think from there, in a shorter period of time, you can also pick up through their action, words, and deeds, whether they're actually vesting in me. That's the first sign. Investing is, are they invested in my success as much as they are in their own? In other words, someone who's vested in me at work is going to, whether it's a peer or a boss or even a subordinate, really, they're going to give me opportunities to train and advance my career when it might not even be beneficial to them. They might give up a seat to attend a certain conference in favor of me going. They're going to give me opportunities for promotion. They're going to give me opportunities for advancement. all these different things, that's someone who's vested in my success as much as they are their own, because they see when I win, they will win as well.
Can I give an example on that one? Because
absolutely. Go right ahead.
This one will be really pertinent to anybody who's listening who wants to start their own podcast. I'm sure like you, I get a lot of requests to go on podcasts, and I can tell pretty quickly if this is somebody who's vested in me or not, because a lot of the times, and these are usually podcasters who are just getting started, they reach out with something to the effect of, hey, I'm in my first 10 shows and like having you on would really be a boost to my podcast. It's like, hey, I can appreciate that.
Sure.
There's nothing wrong with that. But that doesn't speak to anything to me as to why I would want to do it or what value would be in it for me. So it's got to be this mutually beneficial agreement. And I think that speaks to the vesting component you're talking about.
Absolutely. And I deal with podcasters a lot also. And I'd say 99.9% of y'all are so well positioned to vest in me as much as yourself.
Of course.
Always asking, even after the show, hey, what can I do to promote you? And so it's always fantastic. So vesting's an easy one, I think we recognize, but when you give it a label and meaning, helps you be more conscious of looking for it and most importantly, giving it as well, because it's so important.
Right.
And over a period of time, I think actions are really important as well, because actions is sign 4. And there's 2 sides of actions. What I'm looking for in actions, the first thing is that I'm looking for positive actions. In other words, is someone gossiping or not gossiping? Are they saying positive things about people or negative things about people? So I'm looking for good positive actions, vice negative actions. And the other thing I'm looking for is what I call past patterns of key behaviors. And this is where if you observe someone doing something the same way once, twice, or 3 times, the likelihood of them doing it the same way 4, 5, and 6 times is pretty dang high.
Right.
And so that becomes very predictable behavior. There's many people are highly predictable, because if you just look at their pattern of way they engage people, way they engage situations, I won't name particular politicians, but you can think of 1 or 2 particularly that they do the same thing the same way every time. You poke them, you know exactly what they're going to do in reciprocity. It's very, very predictable.
Which is good from both an ally perspective and an enemy perspective. It's good to know both. Hey, how is this ally going to respond, and how is the enemy going to respond? Or maybe enemy is not the right word, but adversary, right? Sure, yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it does, because then people know exactly what they can expect, and when you know what exactly to expect, you can manage your expectations and plan accordingly. It's people that are all over the board that you got to watch out for, because you're like, oh my gosh, what are they going to do? Because that goes into another highly critical one I'm looking at is number 6, which is stability. Do they maintain emotional stability during times of stress and crisis, or do they completely fly off the rails and stay off the rails? Because generally, people are going to emotionally react to negative input and negative stimulus, but how fast do they come back? Do they have tools in their own processes and checklists in place to bring them back to reasonable thinking again? It's like me. I know exactly what I do when I'm under stress. And so I actually have a process I have to, in my brain, when I see I'm getting emotionally hijacked, which means I have the negative thoughts and emotions coming in here, I ask myself right away is what I'm about to do or say going to help or hinder a healthy relationship? And so that's the first thing I'll start doing. And this is also where I will bring in what I call my beta testers. I am, as human beings, we get very, very good at doing the things we do a lot. And I do strategizing, good, healthy conversations and good, healthy engagements a lot. But that does not mean I do not get emotional bias inflicted on it.
Right,
so anytime that I'm going to do anything of consequence, which is kind of deviating from the norm of our normal lives, I have what I call my beta testers, my trusted, good, close friends and family that I will bounce things off of. I'll have them read something for me. I have a great friend. He's a flight instructor, and he's chief flight instructor. He's a number of years older than me. I will bounce things off of him. My wife is one of my other beta testers. I mean, anytime before I put something on my website, before I send an email out, before I do anything, I have her read it. My son's another one. My daughter's another one. I have people in my life that I will have as my trusted beta testers when I know I might be emotionally too connected to the thing I'm trying to do. So there might be my own bias coming into the language, which can be very detrimental at times. And so I always want to make sure if I'm too close, I'm going to use those good, safe people in my life.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely powerful to have those advisors and people that you've given permission to tell you the truth. Like, it's not really an advisor if you haven't either verbally or in past behavior given them permission to speak truthfully to you.
Yeah, and the big thing is, and I, especially with my wife, I've had to make sure that I don't react negatively when I hear things I didn't want to hear.
Right, because then she'll never share it with you again.
Yeah, and so I've gotten much better at it. But yeah, it's so, and it also requires a great amount of humility to be able to do that. Asking for help, saying that I don't have all my crap together all the time is very, very important. Because again, what's that say? It says you're human. No one likes to be looked down upon by anyone. No one wants to feel inferior to anyone. And like I said, my camera's stacked on top of all my books right here. These are my manuals on how not to be the moron I was born to be.
I was going to say, especially difficult on the humility side for the high drivers and the achievers. And a lot of guys listening are definitely that way.
But the second you can start doing that and you have that self-awareness come in and you are not afraid to share your openness about, hey, what you suck at. Because I had I asked a lot of questions of people when you wanted to become on my behavioral team. I put out I send out a solicitation, yet I send a resume. Then you had to do an interview and a few other things. And during the interview, I had two critical questions. And the first one was, tell me about your strengths. And when you told me about your strengths, I didn't want to hear why you thought you were awesome. I wanted to hear what strengths you had that were in terms of the priorities of the team, because, I want to hear why you're going to be awesome for the team. And the next one was, when I asked you what your weaknesses were, what I wanted to hear is I did want to hear transparency on what you sucked at. And I wanted to hear what your plan was to overcome it. Because if you could be transparent with me about, and honest, not say my weaknesses, I care too much or something like that.
My weaknesses, I have no weaknesses.
Right. I want to hear what it is. And then I want you to tell me your plan. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to make an effort. Because, I'll take anyone with the self-awareness to tell me what you suck at and what your plan is. I'll take them any day of the week, because that's someone self-aware that is willing to be transparent. Because when you're being transparent with yourself, it means you're going to be transparent with me. It helps me make better decisions, help me place you in a position for success. So those are the things, too easy to think, because I can teach anyone to flip a switch. I can't teach self-awareness.
Right. Hey, Robin, will you hold on one quick second? My daughter came in a few minutes ago.
You betcha.
And you saw me go like this.
Yep.
She left the door open, and I can hear him scurrying around downstairs. So just give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
Scurrying around, you bet.
All right, perfect. Gotcha. Well, I got to say, this has been a very fascinating discussion. Obviously, and I took more bullet points on what I wanted to talk about, but for the sake of time, I'll let the guys just go pick up a copy of the book, which is what they need to do anyways, because there's so much great information in here and everything else you're sharing. I do want to ask a couple of questions as we wind things down. I didn't prepare you for this question, but since we talk with primarily men, Order of Man podcast,
sure,
I wanted to ask you, what does it mean to be a man?
That's a really good question. I'll go back to something I said earlier. I think to be a man to me is to be a very cognizant resource for the success and prosperity of others. Be a nourisher, be a supporter, be a resource. Be a calm in a storm, and be an anchor for people when they need that anchor. Both emotionally and physically. Especially I think today, and what we're all going through with COVID-19, I think it's a great example. Strong people stand up and are there for others, with great resolve, with, I think not fearing change, and accepting that things are always going to move forward. And what are you going to do about it? We had a great expression in the Marine Corps, with brand new second lieutenants that, you're faced with all weird situations that you could never, ever predict in a million years. And every time a new daunting situation that you had no idea what you're going to do, you're faced with, and you kind of got that deer in the headlights look, and you wanted to kind of run away and not do anything, inevitably you had someone above you, some senior guy, look at you and say, all right, what now, Lieutenant? Meaning, all right, here's life. Here's what you dealt with.
Right.
You got a choice, crawl under a rock or move forward.
Yeah.
And so I think men don't crawl under a rock. They move forward.
That's excellent. That's great. I appreciate that. Well, how do we connect with you? Get a copy of the book, find out what you're all about and what you're up to. I know the guys are going to be interested.
Absolutely. Please go to my website. It's called peopleformula.com. It's my company, all one word, peopleformula.com. On there, I got links to my books, and they're all on Amazon, and some of them are still in Barnes Noble stuff, but links on my books are right there. I do have my one of my online training courses out. It's about 10 techniques to quick rapport. It's a matter of fact, if you email me from the show, mention this show, I'll give you a discount code for if you want to take it as well, which includes 30 minutes of coaching with me, a Zoom call with me. So I really try to do all I can to be a resource, because I'm putting myself out there, for everyone that is doing everything online. Everything that we're talking about can be translated to online learning, working, business, and all that. So I highly recommend you reach out to me. I field questions all the time. I have no problem doing it. So that's the easiest way. And follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and all that.
Great. Robin, we'll sync everything up so the guys know where to go. I really appreciate you. I appreciate your service to this country and everything you've done there. And of course, the information you share, because knowing how to understand people, knowing to the degree that you can, their motives and their intentions, and then being a better people person, a better communicator is all very, very important. Probably the most important skill set that I think an individual can learn.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. And even now, I think the aftermath of this is going to be psychologically very challenging for people. And if we can really focus on all these skills and tools to help us with those relationships and help people feel connected, because again, we want to be valued by others and we want to feel affiliated. And I think with social distancing right now, with a lot of people locked down in their homes and working distant-wise, there are still things we can do with our language and our actions that can still help people feel that connection that we are genetically craving. And so make sure we're doing that for each other right now, and we'll all get through it great.
Agreed. Thanks again.
Thank you for having me again, Ryan. Appreciate it.